Welcome to this episode of Fossils and Fiction, a podcast that explores the stories of prehistoric life, most often through the stories we humans tell about it. It's produced by me, Travis Holland, with support from Charles Sturt University. Enjoy. Nick, tell me a little bit about yourself. Thanks for joining us for the interview. I'd love to hear a bit about your background.
Sure. Well, thanks for having me, Travis. It's always fun to chat about dinosaurs and about paleontology. So my background is I'm one of those kids that knew that I wanted to be a paleontologist since I was a child. I found my first fossil at the age of, I think it was 6 or 7. I'm from Ottawa, Canada. Ottawa, Canada, the rocks in that area are not dinosaur-bearing rocks. They are Ordovician rocks, typically around 450 million years ago. At that time, North America was equatorial. It was kind of lying on its side with the equator going smack right through it. Mm-hmm. And Ottawa, which now, can easily get down to minus 40 in winter, was basically tropical type scenario. We have reefs, beautiful ocean animals, not any vertebrates that I'm aware of. But I found an early cephalopod, a relative of the squids, a thing called or an orthocone. Mm-hmm. And it's kind of like a long, rather than the kind of coiled ammonites that you can think about, this thing was a kind of a long but solid, unlike modern squid. And that was my first fossil. My dad didn't believe me when I first found it, and but I said it was fossil, and then he saw it. I was like, yeah, that is a fossil. And we took it to the Geological Survey of Canada that was in Ottawa, luckily enough, and I got it identified, and that sort of spawned my love of fossils and the fossil record. And that I don't remember exactly where the transition happened from those fossils to dinosaurs, mm-hmm. But maybe it was Jurassic Park. I don't think it was, but it could have been. But definitely, I kind of fell in love with it throughout high school. Of course, I couldn't admit that I liked fossils, but I just kind of had it in the back of my head. And,
but the notion as a kid of pulling something out of the ground and saying, "Oh, this is unique. This is an extinct animal."
That's right, and the realization that you're the first human to see it.
Mm.
I think that's one of the most enjoyable.
That's actually an amazing origin story. I think most people go, "Oh, I like dinosaurs, so I went and did this thing." But you're kind of, I stumbled across a fossil.
I did. I stumbled across a fossil, and it just kind of spawned that profession. And of course, I didn't know for sure that I'd become a paleontologist. Mm-hmm. But I was fortunate that as I went through high school, I had a love of sciences. And then when I reached university, the university that I ended up going to kind of, I think they offered me the best scholarship. They started a vertebrate paleontology program almost a year after I started.
Yeah, and
so I was very lucky actually, and everything kind of fell into place.
Yeah, sometimes being in the right place at the right time is really important. And you've kind of demonstrated two links there that.
And if that isn't an analogy for finding fossils in the fossil record, I don't know what is.
Yeah, absolutely. Now you're at the University of New England. What are you working on at the moment up there?
So I guess on a broad level, it's dinosaur diversity. So I love the nuts and bolts paleo of going and collecting new specimens, describing them, identifying what we have. But on the flip side, I like applying a variety of kind of more modern methods, numerical, statistical methods, 3D scanning methods, to try to understand dinosaurs on a more biological level. So, it's kind of a combination of modern and traditional paleontology.
I guess paleontology is moving in that direction, really focusing on the ecology of things now and considering dinosaurs more as living animals.
Correct. Yeah, I'd agree with that.
Do you think that's been aided by a more popular dinosaur media over the last 30 years?
Probably. It's definitely true that we, as paleontologists, have more and more of this sort of expectation that when we publish something, when we work on something, we want to have a sort of public-facing view of our discoveries. Mm-hmm. And typically, a discovery on its own will be a little bit interesting, but if you can give that sort of that biological interactivity of a fossil, you're likely to get a lot more attention, I guess.
Yeah, great. Now, a little bit of background for the listeners.
Mm.
Nick, I came across you on Twitter at first, and you were talking about a new subject that you were starting up there at UNE. And I was looking to get into, maybe some study, and I sort of looked at a few different courses around the place. But I was already doing this podcast, and so it just seemed natural that paleontology should be the one that I could do. I think I hadn't considered it until that point because I had figured I needed to be on campus somewhere, and I'm tied to a campus that doesn't have a paleontology program. So
Sure. Yep.
where was I going to go? But I saw your subject, which is called Dinosaurs, and you were talking about it, and it was redesigned as a sort of online subject focused just on dinosaurs. Tell me a bit about that subject and, in general, your approach to teaching.
Sure. So I guess when I got the job, if we maybe go back a little bit to sort of the beginning of getting the job here at UNE, I was kind of brought on to teach for a colleague who was off on a research grant, and I really quickly realized that UNE had become a hub of paleo, at least from a research perspective. We had at that time, with me coming in, I want to say upwards of 6 researchers working on different aspects of the fossil record, anywhere from early Cambrian life and the Cambrian explosion all the way to modern humans, or I guess fossil humans and human evolution. And it just struck me that, wow, we have this amazing resources of knowledge, but funny enough, teaching paleontology at UNE was suffering. Enrollments were not great. And we really only had a few fundamental units. So we had introductory paleontology. We had a brand new vert paleontology unit that had just started, that my colleague Phil had launched. And then we had one that was a bit more of a stratigraphy and how we use fossils to look at the rock record. And it's like, well, but we have so much more to give than just the sort of the fundamental paleontology that you could probably find in a lot of different universities. And over the basically from 2017 onwards, we started renewing some of the teaching content, initially just with the units that we had, but then it sort of occurred to me and to our colleagues that we have the ability to now grow this, and what we need to be doing is elevating our teaching to the level at which we are producing research, because our research output is great, it's high, it's world leading, but our teaching needed to basically reach that as well. And so the dinosaur unit was basically the first attempt at really building this this paleo center from both a research and teaching perspective. And I think the idea was that we want a high enrollment, we want a moneymaker, we want a unit that will bring people, will attract people, but then through that, you may notice, for instance, you may have remembered that it took, I think, maybe 4 weeks to get into dinosaurs. The initial few weeks in the dinosaur unit was a lot more about fossils, about natural history, about evolution. And so really we're using dinosaurs as a hook. And of course, we talk lots about dinosaurs, but it's really about getting people interested in natural history.
Which is really what a lot of sciences, I think geology has done that very much. And paleontology itself is, of course, not just dinosaurs, but it's kind of 100%. It's the plank to get people interested in the science.
That's right. And there's nothing wrong with being interested in it initially because you love dinosaurs. That's how I got into it. And then, but then you all of a sudden realize that, wow, this world is much bigger. It's much more fascinating than just dinosaurs.
Yeah, absolutely. Is there any other SciComm sort of work, science communication work that you kind of do or that you've done, Nick?
I guess, I try to, especially when we have what we would consider relatively impactful papers come out, we try to do garnish some sort of media attention. I've written several articles for The Conversation, as I know you have as well. And so that's definitely one way of trying to convert what I'm doing in a kind of pure research world to the general public. So probably that's one of the main ones. Otherwise, there's the kind of standard public talks that one gives on and off. We have a really fun event that we do here at in Armadale. Of course, you have to be in Armadale to really participate in it. It's called SciFlix. This was started by Dr. Marissa Betts, who's another paleontologist here at UNE. She loves movies and she loves paleontology. And so we've been getting sort of this cross movie scientist sort of relationship where a scientist goes up, gives a little presentation, then they show a movie, and then there's like a Q&A about the sort of the science of the individual, but also the science of the movie.
That was going to be my exact next question, as I knew about SciFlix, and I was going to, it's a fantastic way to again get that interest in the media stories and combine that, or bring the science angle to it, and expand on people's interest and keep building on that. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, maybe next time you're up, we should try to coordinate with you seeing one. Maybe you want to give one.
Yeah, well, we can talk about that. There are sometimes some frustrating misconceptions that float around in paleontology and various other fields, and you do interviews occasionally, not giving anything away specifically there, but what are some of those frustrating misconceptions sometimes that you might get asked about and you have to kind of tackle head on?
Misconceptions, eh? I mean, you're probably right that there are several out there. I think that that tackling misconception isn't necessarily as frustrating. It's okay to address them. I think it's important to address when you, especially like things like the typical one these days is the connection between birds and dinosaurs. Even though that we've known of that for a long time, it still continuously surprises in interviewers and whatnot. That was not something that they had necessarily sort of considered as much. So, yeah, I think we as scientists try to take any opportunity that we get to not berate it, but to always kind of remind everybody that of these sort of connections. Because I think it also just makes the discipline much more interesting to a general audience.
Yeah. I might get a little bit more specific then on the question that I was kind of getting at between the lines. You and I participated in an interview a few weeks back as we record, and afterwards I think you said to me there was a conversation or a question asked about whether crocodiles could take down a T-Rex. And you kind of said to me afterward, that was weird. Where did that question come from?
Yeah, well, that's actually one of the oldest questions, I think, and to some extent, I think probably for some people, it is a way of trying to get some standard. It's like, okay, I think of this animal as ferocious. Where on my subjective ferocious scale can I put T-Rex, or can I put any other dinosaur? And so I think it's almost like it's the human condition, right? To try to get perspective on something that you can't quite grasp, and the fossil record is really good at that, because first of all, it's millions of years ago. We don't work on a million-year level in our own brain, and second of all, it's an animal that doesn't exist nowadays, and so our fantasy can just run rampant with what this animal was like. As a biologist and a paleontologist, sometimes those questions are a bit frustrating because you don't really have an answer for them.
Yeah.
I suppose one would have to really nail down to, okay, well, what are the biomechanical capacity of this animal versus that animal? And so it's a hard question to answer on the fly, but there's tons of TV shows that have tried to do that.
And I guess it's, as you say, it's a question you can't answer on the fly without kind of thinking it through. And there's also a lot of assumptions built in, right? So, is it a ambush scenario, on which side, and all those sorts of things? Yeah, absolutely. So, what role do you think the media can play in helping to tell paleo stories, whether factual media like news and interviews, or fictional stuff? And we can address those separately if you like.
I mean, I think the media, the role it plays is to try to bring what is often a very complex concepts associated with fossils, evolution, or biological interpretations, and make it digestible to people who may not know all the background, because obviously when we write a paper, we've read hundreds of papers in anticipation of writing this paper, and have read it multiple times, and we have lots of experience dealing with these fossils, and we're trying to then sell it to people who have not had the same kind of background. So I think that is the true challenge of science communicators, and I think there's definitely an art form for that, and probably I think that is the biggest benefit that the media can give us scientists.
Absolutely. Nick, I've noticed that fantastic cast of Saurolophus up there on your shelf behind you. Tell us about that specimen.
Sure. So actually the specimen number evades me at present. That is a cast of Saurolophus angustirostris, which is a species from Mongolia. It's from the Nemegt Formation. And so it fits in that nice, the Maastrichtian, which is basically the last age just before the end Cretaceous extinction. And so it is one of the last living duckbill dinosaurs that we know of. There may be a few in North America as well, the things like Edmontosaurus. Saurolophus is actually quite fascinating in that there is a Saurolophus in Mongolia and there's a Saurolophus in North America, Saurolophus osborni. It's one of the few hadrosaurs where you get the same genus on both sides. So it's pretty fascinating.
Wouldn't happen very much with terrestrial dinosaurs in general, would it? Across continents.
Yeah, I mean, we know that they were moving around. Definitely, I mean, we find dinosaurs on every single continent. So we know that their dispersal ability was high, but it is rare to find very closely related ones. Typically, you're looking on you get kind of regional groupings, and then you get some dispersion typically lower down on the evolutionary tree. Or sometimes what you have is very long. You may have species that are separated by thousands of kilometers or continents away, and yet are coming very closely related, and that typically is more of a conundrum than necessarily true knowledge of that lineage truly migrating or moving in those directions. But yeah, Saurolophus is a kind of a neat one. Right at the end, you get them in both on both sides.
Cool. Nick, is there anything else you want to have a chat about? Just you've got an open mic here and a bit of an audience listening on my podcast occasionally. What do you want to tell them about paleontology?
What do I want to tell them about paleontology? I guess to go outside, go get some fresh air. Go look for the rocks in your area. There are some really fabulous web-based applications for knowing what kind of rocks are in your area, like what ages you're looking at. And as a kid, for instance, I would go out and look for stuff, and in my brain, I thought I was going to find dinosaurs, but of course, that was never going to be the case in Ottawa. Go explore the rocks in your area and see, and I guess try to get some sense of whether or not you can find fossils. Because if you find the right rocks, if you're finding sedimentary rocks, there should be fossils in there of some kind. It may not be, dinosaurs, but you may get a variety. I mean, plants are everywhere, so you should get plant fossils. You should get
plants and fish and
that's right.
Insects potentially if they're fine enough.
That's right. Yep, exactly.
All sorts. Great. Go outside. I think that's a great thing to end on. Right. Yeah. Thanks so much, Dr. Nic Campione. I appreciate your time.
Oh, it's my pleasure, Travis.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Fossils and Fiction. We're always looking for more paleo stories to tell and welcome your suggestions through our social channels. You can also send voice notes via Spotify or social media. Podcast theme music is Sonora by Quincas Morea via the YouTube audio library. Show notes are available on the website, fossilsfiction.co. Please subscribe and rate the podcast on your preferred podcasting platform.